Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating source document, a meticulously curated 31-day compilation of ancient biblical texts. And our main goal here is to deconstruct these passages so we can uncover a robust, anchoring view of hope. You know, we hear the word hope thrown around constantly in everyday conversation, right? Usually it's used as a pretty flimsy wish for good weather or a lucky outcome. But the text we're analyzing today presents a completely different architecture for hope. It frames it not just as some fleeting emotion, but as a rigid, structural necessity for the human condition.
So drawing straight from the profound question asked in Psalm 42, we first have to acknowledge the very real human experiences of weariness, anxiety, and just being deeply disturbed within. The source material doesn't shy away from this at all. It asks outright, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me?" And honestly, this is the perfect starting point, because it validates the reality of despair. Before we can even begin to understand the cure, we've got to look honestly at the symptoms. Life brings immense pressure, and this text operates on the assumption that feeling overwhelmed is a universal baseline. The question isn't whether you're going to feel downcast, the real question is where do you turn when you do?
Now, instead of looking at hope as just a vague wish for a better tomorrow, our source document provides a daily meditation designed to build a really powerful, resilient foundation over the course of a month. What we're essentially looking at is a 31-day blueprint. Think of it kind of like a gym routine for your mind. By isolating one specific verse or passage for each day, the text is suggesting that true hope actually requires daily, intentional cultivation. It's a mental muscle, and it needs to be formed through consistent reps. You don't just magically stumble into profound hope, you have to walk deliberately toward it, day by day, systematically retraining your focus.
All right, Section 1. What is true hope? Moving beyond wishful thinking.
Take a look at the strong structural words used here in Hebrews 11:1, confidence and assurance. These are definitely not passive words. They describe a grounded, rock-solid certainty. In the context of this document, hope is treated as a solid reality, an absolute evidence of things not yet visible to the naked eye, but completely trusted in the mind and heart. So, the crucial point is that true biblical hope isn't a guess. It's an absolute confidence and a firm assurance in things that are currently unseen.
And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast we find in Psalm 33, which warns us against what it calls a vain hope. Back in the ancient world, a horse represented the absolute pinnacle of military technology and strength. It was literally the ultimate symbol of human power. But the text explicitly warns against trusting in that kind of temporal strength for deliverance, calling it a vain hope because, well, despite all its great might, it ultimately cannot save you. On the flip side, true hope is positioned as trusting in the Lord's unfailing love. It's this fundamental shift in reliance. You're moving your trust from the tools in your own hands to the character of the divine.
Moving on to Section 2. The anchor in the storm, finding hope in the crucible of suffering.
Here, the text from Hebrews 6 uses this incredibly powerful visual metaphor of an anchor. Think about the actual function of an anchor for a second. It does absolutely nothing to stop the storm. The wind is still howling, the waves are still crashing, and the ship is still getting battered. But the anchor holds the ship secure to a foundation beneath the surface that the storm literally cannot touch. The source material claims that we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It reminds us that true hope provides absolute stability, keeping us from drifting or capsizing when everything in our immediate environment feels totally chaotic.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Romans chapter 5 outlines a literal step-by-step process. Notice that it completely refuses to ignore pain. Instead, it reveals how hope is actually forged right in the middle of it. It starts with suffering, but suffering produces perseverance, that gritty ability to just keep taking the next step. And then, that perseverance over time forges character. Finally, it is out of that tested, refined character that true, unshakable hope is produced. This tells us that the deepest hope isn't found by avoiding hardship, but by walking straight through it and allowing the crucible of suffering to do its transforming work.
Which brings us to a really fascinating psychological practice found in the Book of Lamentations. The writer is in the absolute depths of immense grief, yet they say, "This I call to mind, and therefore I have hope." Notice the active verb there. Even in the darkest moments, deliberately calling to mind that God's compassions never fail is the key to activating that anchor for the soul. Hope here is an act of sheer defiance against despair. It requires you to actively interrupt your current cycle of negative thoughts and intentionally recall past faithfulness. You have to actively call it to mind to experience its benefits.
Okay, let's jump into Section 3, renewing your weary strength. What true hope actually does for us.
You know, in our modern culture of endless hustle and incredibly high burnout rates, this ancient text really levels the playing field. It states plainly that even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. It doesn't matter how young, how healthy, or how naturally resilient you think you are. If you rely solely on your own internal batteries, you are eventually going to deplete them. You will stumble. You will fall. This is a stark, universal reality of burnout, and it perfectly sets up the need for an external source of energy.
But then, the very next verse hits us with this incredible promise. Hoping in the Lord miraculously renews that weary strength, using the majestic metaphor of an eagle soaring. An eagle doesn't achieve those high altitudes by furiously flapping its wings to exhaustion, right? No, it finds a thermal, an upward current of warm air, and simply stretches out its wings to let the wind carry it. That is the exact picture of this biblical hope. It's not about trying harder. It's about positioning yourself to be carried by a strength that is entirely not your own, allowing you to run and not grow weary.
And the ultimate goal of this renewal isn't just surviving the day. As we see in Romans 15:13, the goal is to be filled with all joy and peace, so much so that you actually overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. The imagery here is of a cup that is filled way beyond its capacity. It suggests that true hope is abundant. It doesn't just sustain you internally, it literally spills over into the environment and the people around you.
Which leads us to Section 4, Sharing Your Living Hope, Expressing Hope Hourly to the World.
The text here doesn't describe some dusty, stagnant philosophy. It calls it a living hope, vibrantly active, breathing, and completely capable of adapting to the world around it. The source attributes the vitality of this hope directly to the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Because the focal point of the hope is alive, the hope itself is categorized as a living entity within the believer, constantly growing and responding outwardly.
Notice how in 1 Thessalonians, hope is pinpointed as the specific catalyst that inspires human endurance. There is a brilliant triad at work here. Work is produced by faith, labor is prompted by love, and endurance is inspired by hope. If you want the staying power to keep doing good in a really difficult world, this text argues that hope is the necessary fuel. It works in perfect tandem with faith and love to make sure that you don't just give up when the labor gets tough. Finally, Section 5, Daily Prayers of Hope, Putting Hope into Daily Practice. Look at the incredible balance in how these closing prayers break down the attributes of Jesus. He is the hope for those who trust, the power for those who serve, the wisdom for those who follow, and the uniter for those who worship. The text then immediately uses these exact attributes as a launchpad, asking for the strength and the boldness necessary to reach a needy nation with this love and hope. It's a beautifully crafted prayer that tightly aligns deeply personal trust with public service. What I really appreciate here is that these close-in prayers absolutely refuse to sugarcoat reality. The text openly acknowledges that yes, we live in a world of despair and a world of darkness. There is zero toxic positivity going on here. Instead, it boldly contrasts that dark reality with the declaration that God is the absolute sole source of hope and light. It's a grounded, incredibly realistic optimism that stares the darkness right in the face and confidently declares the presence of a greater light.
So we're going to leave you with this final, profound question pulled straight from our source text. As you anchor your soul in the storm, as you actively call to mind the source of your confidence, are you ready? When people look at your life and see an unexplainable joy in a dark world, are you prepared to gently and respectfully share the reason for this hope with everyone who asks? It's a powerful challenge. Don't just hold on to hope. Become an ambassador for it.